In this darkness of the sources of cognition, the freedom of hypotheses is so unlimited that it is a pity about all the effort and work to concern oneself with refutations, since everyone follows his own mind in such cases. I, for my part, look only at the specific maxims of reason in such cases, from which each party is starting off, and after which he usually also knows how to find facts which favor them. And afterwards, I search for my own maxim of reason, which makes me incredulous against all those explanations, even before I manage to become clear about the counter-arguments. If I then find my maxim well tried, in accordance with the use of reason in natural science, and alone fitting to the consistent manner of thinking, then I follow it without caring for those alleged facts, which borrow their credibility and sufficiency to the adopted hypothesis almost exclusively from that once chosen maxim, in which one also can effortlessly counter with 100 other facts. Immanuel Kant. So I explained how, when trying to find the truth, we should use the skeptical method. That is, we should hold back our judgment and first try to stay neutral, so to say, and first look at the matter at hand more closely. First try to find all the pros and all the cons, and also try to not just support our own opinion, but try to find the holes in our position and try to find arguments that support the other side, so that then in the end we are qualified to make our judgment. But still, at the end, it comes down to either judging that one side is right or that the other is right, and still it comes down to there being arguments on both sides, and me having to decide which arguments I find more convincing. So how, even if I don't judge immediately, even if I suspend my judgment at first, how can I ultimately make sure to tell truth from error? That is a question that leads us to Kant's critical method. And here your alarms should go off, because Kant is famous. Kant is so important in the history of philosophy because of his three critiques. Those are his main works: the Critique of Pure Reason, the Critique of Practical Reason, and the Critique of the Power of Judgment. And now here we come to the critical method. Well, it is that method which he mainly employs in the critiques, and that's why they are called critiques. So what is this method about? Well, first of all, there are a lot of different opinions, of different positions in the history of philosophy. And to Kant, it was important to take them seriously and to not just dismiss them. He also wasn't of the opinion that it was just arguing about words. Like, that's what some people back then said, that all the different opinions of the different philosophers, it just came down to them using different words to express more or less the same things, and that with the right interpretation, you could essentially make them all say the same things, and you could essentially make all differences vanish. Kant basically said that's a bit cheap, and he said, no, it's unlikely that for many centuries or even millennia, great minds disagreed and didn't notice that actually they agreed with each other and were just using different words to describe the same things. Someone should have noticed sooner, Kant believes. So he takes those differences seriously, and he believes that they really do constitute different standpoints. And now, of course, when you have two opinions disagreeing with each other and excluding each other, then one can assume that at least one of them is false. Maybe both are, and the truth is probably some third standpoint, but at least one of those two has to be wrong. And to find out which one is wrong, it might be helpful to think about how that even is possible, being wrong. So how is an error in thinking, how is a wrong opinion that we still think to be true despite being wrong, how is that possible? And this is a question that people seldom ask themselves, probably because it's just such a normal and daily occurrence for us that there are errors. We all believe that other people are wrong in many things, and we all probably also have experienced that we ourselves were wrong in something. So being wrong seems like a normal thing for us. But it shouldn't. It should actually give us pause. The question here is not how is it possible to not know something, because that's easy to answer. That's not such a big mystery. But how is it possible to believe that you know something despite it being true? Because something must convince you. There must be something in it that makes it seem true for you. But how can that be when it isn't true? Plato already said that philosophy starts with wondering. The regular people, they go about their lives and they perceive many phenomena every day, but they don't really stop and reflect about them. Even a child probably experiences birds flying in the sky, or it experiences water turning into ice, but most people will probably take these things at face value. That's just how the world is, how we experience the world to be. Birds fly, humans have wrong opinions. But philosophy, and here I will remind you of what I talked about in my lecture on what is metaphysics. I will remind you that natural science is a part of philosophy in the wider sense. So philosophy starts once you don't just accept things because you know them, because that's how they are, but once you start wondering, how is it a bird can fly when it has a body, when it has weight, just like I do? How is it that water, which is fluid, suddenly can turn hard? And so we should also ask, how is it that we can be wrong? So Kant, I would say, in this is a transcendental philosopher. I will talk more about his transcendental philosophy and about what exactly that means in a future lecture. But for now, it's enough to say that transcendental philosophy is about asking the question about the condition of the possibility of something. So what is the condition that needs to be in place for it to even be possible for a being to be wrong, to have wrong opinions? Well, many in the 18th century answered that question by simply saying, well, human beings are limited. We are not God. God is all-knowing. But we are limited, and that's why we can be wrong. But that, Kant says, is not a good answer. That, he says, would mean blaming nature for our failures. So saying it is in our nature as humans, because we are limited beings, we have to be wrong. I would say that this is an unaufklärt opinion, because unaufklärtness is always living with this victim stance, always viewing yourself as a victim, as someone passive, as someone innocent, so to say. And here you would essentially be saying, well, I'm just a victim of my nature. I can't help it. I can't help being wrong. I am not responsible for being wrong. And I am not responsible. It is not my fault. Could be the motto of unaufklärtness. Kant says our limited nature only explains that and why we aren't all-knowing. But not knowing something, being ignorant of something, is not the same as being wrong about something. So consider a blind person. If I asked a blind person, what color does my t-shirt have? And he would answer, it is blue, then he would have a wrong opinion, because it is red. But it is not his blindness making him give a wrong answer. Because he could just say, well, I don't know. I can't know since I'm blind. I can't see colors. And then he wouldn't give a wrong answer. He would just give no answer. So only once we make a judgment about something, only then can we be right or wrong. As long as we don't judge, we also can't be wrong. So the blind person should be mindful of his limits. He should reflect on the fact that he's blind and that he can't judge about colors. And that is also what we should do in general. That is why the first of Kant's questions, so here I will remind you of the lecture on what is wisdom, wherein I said that to Kant, philosopher, according to the world sense, the philosopher as a sage, as a lawgiver of reason, has to answer 4 questions. And the first of those questions was, what can I know? So, in other words, what are the limits of my knowledge within I can have knowledge, within of which, but outside of them I can't have knowledge. That is the project of Kant's critique, finding these limits. So to say, finding out where human beings are blind, where we must not make judgments, so to not make wrong judgments. And that is a very aufklärt question, because true Aufklärung is about being critical, yes, but not so much being critical of others, even though people like doing that the most, but rather it is about self-reflection, about being critical of yourself. And that means asking, who am I? What am I? What are my abilities and what are the limits of my abilities? That means recognizing, okay, maybe I have sharp ears, maybe I have a good sense of smell, but I'm blind. I can't make judgments on colors. So that is important to note. We can only be wrong when we make a judgment. Kant likes to say sometimes that an academy of science contains more errors than a village of peasants. However, it is important to understand this statement correctly. This is not meant in the way that it might be read in nowadays. This is not pandering to anti-intellectualism. This is not meant to say that the common man, the unlearned man, is somehow smarter and wiser than the scholar. This is not meant as praise of the common sense. You now often have people, anti-intellectual people, who refuse to listen to science, to listen to reasoning and to engage with it, and who will just dismiss something that they don't understand, that sounds paradoxical or outrageous to them. They will just dismiss it by insisting that their common sense tells them otherwise. Well, this common sense, which is supposed to somehow magically give you the right answer to a question without having to actually think about it or inquire into it, this Kant mocks as a sort of divining rod. And this is not what he wants to praise here. When he says that an academy of sciences contains more errors than a village of peasants, he simply means to say, well, the scholars in that academy make more judgments. The peasants in their village tend to stay within their daily lives. Their minds tend to not go beyond their horizon. They tend to not ask deeper questions and not try to give answer on those questions, and so they are less wrong because they only make judgments about their daily lives. But the scholars, they try to go deeper, and in doing so they are sometimes right but also often wrong. Well, how is it then that someone can be wrong? So we can note down that an error can only take place when we make a judgment. But how exactly does an error come about? Well, to Kant, there are only two ways of cognition. I will talk about them more in a future lecture. But for now, they are sensuality and intellectuality. And for now, it should be enough to just think, when you hear those words, to just think what you would commonly think when hearing those words. Well, sensuality, Kant says, can not lead to errors, not because our senses always make correct judgments, but rather because they don't make judgments at all. Kant points out that our senses only give us data. They have sensations. Through them we have sensations, but those sensations in themselves aren't judgments. And those sensations as such cannot be wrong. So if I see something red, I see something red. That's how it is. Even if I'm dreaming or hallucinating or whatever, still I see something red. There's nothing wrong about that. Only once I make a judgment, so once I say, for example, I see something red, so that means that there's indeed a red object in front of me, only then can I be wrong. Because maybe I'm just hallucinating that object and there actually isn't an object. Even when you have something like phantom pain, so there are people who, for example, lose an arm and then afterwards they still feel like they have pain in that arm. But still, that feeling as such is not wrong. If you feel pain, you are in pain. You can't believe to be in pain when you are not actually feeling pain, because that feeling of pain is the pain. There's nothing behind it, so to say. It's not an indicator from which you make a conclusion that you are in pain, but it is in itself the pain. So that feeling is not wrong. You can only be wrong once you say, well, it feels like my arm is in pain. That must mean that I have an arm. So Kant would say that there are no real sensory illusions. There is no such thing as, for example, an optical illusion. You may know various famous examples. For example, you may know this well-known picture where, depending on how you look at it, you see two faces at the sides or you see a vase in the middle. Kant would say that what you see, so what you actually see, what your actual optical sensation is just black and white. A black shape, a white shape. You don't see that there are faces or that there is a vase. That is an interpretation which your thinking does. So the seeing in itself can't be wrong. Once again, I will point out how aufklärt this view of Kant is. The unaufklärt like to be victims, so they will claim to be victims of their senses. They will say, my eyes deceived me, my ears deceived me, but no, they are not evil manipulators out to get you. They have no mind or will of their own. They can't deceive you. They just give you data. And what you do with this data, that's on you. So that leaves us with the other source we have of cognition, and that is intellectuality. That is our thinking. So we could assume now that our errors must come from the intellect. And in a certain sense, that actually is true. That actually is what Kant says. But actually, to be more strict, Kant says no. The intellect as such can't be wrong either. The intellect does judge, does make statements about right and wrong, but the intellect cannot be in contradiction with itself. Nothing, in fact, Kant would say. no force of nature can ever be in contradiction with itself. When the intellect judges that something is correct, that something is true, all it does is saying that this something, this judgment, is in accordance with the intellect's own rules. That can't be wrong. Because if it wasn't in accordance with those rules of the intellect would not judge it to be correct. Well, how then, if our senses can't be wrong because they don't judge at all, and if our intellect as such can't be wrong, how then can we be wrong? Well, Kant says, only through the combination of both of those. So if there was a being which had no sensuality, just intellect, and we can of course not prove that such a being exists, but we can at least imagine such a being and think of such a being of pure intellect, a being like God, that being, Kant says, could never be wrong. Even if that being wasn't God, even if that being was somehow limited, then, well, it wouldn't be all-knowing, but it still would never be wrong. It just wouldn't judge certain things, but those things it would judge, it would always judge correctly. But we, as humans, we have both. We have senses and we have an intellect, and it is when they come together that we can be wrong. Once again, Kant says no force in nature can contradict itself, but one force can influence another force or the effect of another force, and thereby change its course. So, for example, when I'm standing at the top of a tower and I drop something, if we just consider one force of nature, if we just consider gravity, it should drop straight down. But now, if there's another force, if there's a wind, a strong enough wind, it would blow the object to the side. And again, if that was the only force, so if we imagine no gravity existing, just that wind, and if we imagine that wind blowing eternally and always blowing with the same strength, then the object would have to forever be blown sideways. But now there are both forces. The gravity pulling the object down and the wind pushing it to the side. And that means that the object will fall down, but not in a completely straight line. And this is how Kant describes errors. It is through the influence of sensuality on our intellect, and it is by our intellect not dealing correctly with that influence, not being mindful of that influence, that we come to make wrong judgments. Here I will mention that to Kant there are two types of judgments. There are preliminary judgments and determining judgments. The determining judgment is the final judgment you pronounce when you say, okay, this is the case or this isn't the case. Some biologist might go into the woods and he might determine, he might judge what kind of plant, what kind of flower, or what kind of insect he has here in front of him. And then on the other hand, the preliminary judgments, they come before that, and they are basically what their name says. They are judgments that are not final, but rather that are just preliminary, that we now make for a time because this seems to be likely or this seems to be unlikely to us, but that could still be changed. So preliminary judgment, Kant says, is a consciously problematic judgment. So, for example, let's say you are going through the woods and you are trying to pick up mushrooms. You may find a mushroom and it kind of looks like a sort of mushroom that can be eaten. So you make the preliminary judgment that yes, this is an eatable mushroom and therefore you pick it up. But when you bring it home, before you actually cook it and actually eat it, you double check if it really can be eaten, or so if it really is the type of judgment you think that it is, or if it is another type that is in fact poisonous, or at least that is what you should do instead of just eating it. So you should, when you make a preliminary judgment, you should wait and investigate further before you make a data mining judgment. Those preliminary judgments are not the same as prejudices. Kant stresses that. I will talk in a much later lecture when I come to Kant's concept of Aufklärung and to the Aufklärung of the intellect. Then I will talk about what prejudice is to him. But in short, a prejudice would be a rule, a maxim, according to which you turn your preliminary judgments into final, into data mining judgments without investigating them further. But a preliminary judgment as such is not a bad thing. In fact, Kant stresses that we need them. If I go through the woods and I meet a wild fox or a wild dog, it may be harmless, but it may have rabies, and maybe it is the smartest thing to, because of this preliminary judgment of mine, to stay away a bit, to not just walk over and try to pet it. Or likewise, when I read, let's say I have read one book by an author and it was a good book, then I can't know for sure that his next book will also be good. Maybe he just got lucky one time and wrote a good book one time, and now the next thing he writes is shit. But I may, there are so many books coming out each single year, I can't read them all anyways. I can't give all of them a try, so I have to have some criteria by which I go. So I may as well make this preliminary judgment that this author, who has written good stuff before, probably has written good stuff again, and I may pick up his next book. Again, it's not the same as a prejudice. I would have a positive prejudice for that author if I was an actual fan who blindly buys and reads all the author's books just because the first one I picked up was so good, and who, even when the next books are bad, just refuses to see that, or just comes up with justifications to rationalize why they are still good. Then I would have a prejudice in favor of that author. But if I just give the next book a try, that is a preliminary judgment that it might be good, and when I actually have read it, I can still make my data mining judgment that it is or that it isn't a good book. Or there's one example that Kant gives, which fits into his time and into his interests, and that is an explorer. Nowadays, there aren't so many new lands, new islands to discover on Earth. But of course, in the 18th century, there were still a lot of unknown islands, unknown territories. And Kant says that an explorer can't just blindly sail into some direction in the hopes that maybe there will be some land somewhere. But rather he does need preliminary judgment guiding him. Maybe he has some reason to assume that there is land in that direction. Maybe birds or maybe wood drifting in the water have been coming from that direction. But still, it is a preliminary judgment. Only when he went into that direction and actually found land can he determine that, yes, there is indeed land there. So those preliminary judgments are important. But, and this was what the skeptical method was about, right? So I could now describe the skeptical method better. I could now say the skeptical method is about being mindful that a preliminary judgment is not yet a final determining judgment. And the skeptical method means that you suspend that final determining judgment, and the skeptical method means suspending that final judgment, and first, when you made your preliminary judgment, investigating further. That is what the skeptical method is about. So, and here is where errors can happen. Errors happen, Kant would say, because the preliminary judgment is based on our sensuality, is based on the sensual data we have. But those can give us illusions. And what can happen is that our intellect is not mindful of our subjective perspective. That our intellect deals with those sensory data as if they were absolute, as if they were not coming from a limited perspective. So, for example, when I look at the sky, it does look as if the sun is moving along the sky over the course of the day. And therefore, people for the longest time judged that the sun is revolving around the earth. And this judgment, of course, was wrong. And they arrived at that error because they didn't consider that the perspective through which we look at the sun and through which it seems to be moving along the sky, that is a limited subjective perspective. And that it is also possible that we, so the earth on which we stand, might revolve around the sun, because to the onlooker on a moving body, it would look as if that which isn't moving was in fact moving. Or also consider the following example. Consider you are approaching a house and you only see the front, and the front is painted red. So you might make the preliminary judgment that this is a red house. But maybe the other three sides of the house are painted green. And you can't see that because you are just standing in front of the house. Well, now, if you are mindful of your subjective perspective, if you keep in mind that, wait, I only see the house from one side, so the data that my eyes give me, the wet sensation that I have, that might be true and good and fine, but I only see one side of the house. I don't see what the other sides look like. Well, then you are not misjudging if you are mindful of that. But if you fail to keep this subjectivity, to keep this perspective in mind, if you act as if you were God, so to say, because as limited beings, we always look at things from a certain perspective. We never see this thing as a whole. We only perceive it from one direction, so to say. And only God would be capable of, so to say, viewing the thing in its totality. So if we forget that we aren't God, that we don't view the totality of the house, but that we view it from one specific side, and therefore, if we judge that, well, this one side appears to be wet, so the house is wet, that's when we make an error. So errors can be avoided as long as we keep our subjectivity in mind. So what I explained so far about why we err is of course not the critical method. It's not a method at all. It's an explanation of why we can be wrong. But this is the basis on which the critical method is now built. Because once we know why we go wrong sometimes, that can help us telling if and how and why someone else or also we ourselves might be wrong. Well, the critical method is about going to the source of an opinion. It is about asking not just is that opinion right or is it wrong, but rather where does it come from? Why, no matter if it is indeed right or if it is not right, why does it seem right to the person who holds it? And from which principle was this opinion derived? And once we have found that, once we have considered a person's perspective and how from that perspective what the person holds to be true might indeed seem true, then we can judge whether that perspective indeed enables the person to make a judgment in this case, or whether that perspective is too limited to make a judgment here, and whether that limited perspective might be a reason that person is wrong. So in a debate, it is not enough, or it should not be enough, to just give arguments why your position is right and the other position is not right. But rather, what you should try to do is find why, if the other position is not right, why it still seems to be right for the people holding it. And that is something you must explain. Let's go with the example of the house. Let's say someone is looking at the front of the house. The front of the house is wet, and so that person says the house is wet. But I have walked around the whole house and I've seen all four sides of the house, and I've seen that the other three sides are painted green. I could now argue with that person and I could give arguments for my case. I could say, well, I have looked at the house myself and I have seen that 3 sides of the house are green. Or I could say I have talked with the painter who painted the house and he told me that he painted 3 sides green. And maybe through those arguments I might convince the other person, but maybe not. Maybe the other person will insist, but I see that the house is red. You can talk about how it's green as much as you want. I see what I see. And it's not just about convincing the other person. I myself should be careful. I myself should wonder, well, if I'm indeed right, if indeed the house is green on 3 sides, then why wouldn't the other person just agree with me? So just giving arguments why the house is green on 3 sides is not enough. What I should do is explain why the other person isn't aware of that. And well, I could say, dude, you only looked at one side of the house. That one side is indeed red. You are right about that. But you haven't seen the other 3 sides, so you can't possibly know what they look like. And once I have given this explanation of why the house seems red to the other person, I can be much more sure, and also the other person can be more sure, that I'm indeed right. And now if the other person replied with something showing that this explanation is not enough, so for example, let's say the other person would say, but I also walked around the house and looked at it from all sides and I didn't see any green, then that should give me pause again. Then that should make me question his, but also my own position again. And I should once again go to the source and ask myself, how is it that I believe what I believe and he believes what he believes? How did we come to these opinions? And then maybe I would find that, okay, he walked around the house and looked at all sides, but he did that at night. So he couldn't see the other 3 sides properly and didn't realize that they are green. So then I would once again have an explanation why he believes what he believes. I really wish this critical method of Kant was used more. Our public debate in our world as a whole would greatly profit from it. As it stands now, people are used to just arguing and to just giving arguments why their side is right and the other side is wrong. The problem with this is there can always be some arguments. You can argue for anything. Conspiracy theorists who tell you that the earth is flat or that there is no climate crisis, they have arguments too. Of course, they have wrong arguments, but they still have arguments, and maybe sometimes they even have arguments that may sound somewhat convincing at first. So let's actually go with conspiracy theories, because often extreme cases are good examples, because here it is often easier to spot something than in a less extreme case. So let's say someone denies the moon landing. I have heard people argue that, well, when you look at the pictures of the moon landing, you see the American flag flowing in the wind. And this can't be possible because there is no wind, there is no air on the moon. So clearly that shows that it was shot on Earth. And this is an argument that seems to hold some truth. Like, if I'm just naive and haven't thought about the moon landing before, and have never questioned it before, that could indeed give me pause for a moment. Because yes, on the moon there is no air, there is no wind. The flag should just hang down lifelessly. Well, of course there's an explanation for that. The Americans, they were not stupid. They knew that exactly this would happen, and they also knew that it would not look very good on a picture. So the flag they had, and you can actually see that on the pictures of the moon landing if you look a bit more closely, didn't just have a vertical pole, but also a horizontal pole, so that the flag would be spread like it would in the wind. But the thing is, the conspiracy theorist has this argument, but what he should do is apply the critical method. He should not just say, okay, the other side, the people believing in the moon landing, they are wrong, and what are possible ways to prove that they are wrong, what are possible ways to disprove the moon landing. He should rather ask himself, how come that they are wrong? If there was no moon landing indeed, why do so many people believe in it? Why are they deceived like that? What is there that makes it seem to be true? And I mean, in this case, he should especially consider the fact that the moon landing did not take place in a vacuum. I mean, it literally did, but what I mean is that the moon landing took place in the context of the Cold War. And there was a race for space and a race for the moon. And the Americans beat the Soviets to the moon. But one could assume that if it had been fake, the Soviets would have had an interest in exposing that fake to the world and making the USA look bad. So if I'm a conspiracy theorist, I should wonder, how is it that I can clearly see something just from looking at a picture, but the whole Soviet Union, with all its experts and its intelligence service and its scientists, apparently couldn't see that this was fake. And that should give me pause and make me reconsider my position, no matter how many arguments I have in favor of my position. It should make me wonder, if I can't explain how the whole Soviet Union could be wrong, could have been deceived, then maybe it is more likely that I'm the one who is wrong. Or let's say someone denies the climate crisis. I once read someone saying, oh, you people, you are all stupid believing in this. Even if there was global warming and even if the ice was melting, the oceans would not rise, but rather they would sink, because that is middle school physics. Every child should know the anomaly of water. Water extends when it freezes, and therefore once it melts, it is reduced in volume. Well, that is indeed true. That is middle school or elementary school physics. But precisely for that reason, the conspiracy theorist should ask himself, how is it that other people apparently can't apply this basic physics? And how is it that what seems so obvious to me is not seen by them? How is it that to them it seems to make sense that when the ice melts, the ocean rises? And of course, here too, there's an explanation, there's a counter argument, because of course, the ice that's melting is not just some icebergs that already are floating in the water, but rather there's a lot of ice, a lot of glaciers that is not currently in the water at all, that is covering Greenland or Antarctica, and when that melts, it will flow into the ocean, and then of course it will make the ocean rise. But my point here is that you can exchange arguments and counter arguments, but you can also stop and think, why is it the other side believes what it believes? And why is it I believe what I believe? And that is another question than the one, is it correct or is it incorrect? And now we find that in debates, people often, they don't do that. They don't stop to wonder how the other side comes to their beliefs. And I find that mind-boggling. The mere fact that someone holds a different opinion than me, but believes equally strongly in his opinion as I believe in mine, should always give me pause, should always make me question myself. If I believe the other person is wrong, then I admit that it is possible to be wrong. Then how am I so sure that the other person is wrong and not me? Yes, sure, maybe I have arguments that seem to prove my side, but so does the other person. And yes, sure, of course I think my arguments are better and the other person's arguments are wrong, but the other person thinks the same about his arguments. So what makes me so sure that indeed I am the one in the right and the other one is wrong? What makes me so sure that it's not me who is under an illusion? And this shows just how unaufklärt most people are. Because, again, Aufklärung is mainly about self-reflection, about being self-critical. And here we can say that most people are not self-critical. I mean, they hold some belief, and very often they will just dismiss all other beliefs. They will say everyone else is stupid or evil. So if you look at political debates, so often I've heard some right-wingers say that all leftists are idiots, all leftists are ridiculous, they are all stupid. Really? You are saying that millions of people are just stupid and beneath your intellectual level? You are saying that you are smarter than every single leftist who ever lived? Including great leftist intellectuals and thinkers? They were all just stupid? That's it? That's your position? I mean, that's very easy. And I'm sure it helps sleeping well, but it's a bit too easy and a bit too cheap. And to be clear here, the same goes for the other side, of course. I would say the same to a leftist telling me that everyone on the right is just stupid. You can't just dismiss millions of people like that. You can't be so arrogant as to think that you are better than every single person on the other side. Or if we consider the matter of religion, of faith, you have millions or billions of people believing that they have the true belief. But you should consider that no matter what your belief is, even if you are a Christian, which is the most widespread belief on earth, but even then you are still a minority. No matter what you believe, the vast majority of people who live now and who have lived in the past do and did not believe the same thing as you. So what makes you so sure that you are right? Especially considering that most people just believe what they have been born into and what they have been raised with. So if you are a Christian, the most likely reason for that is that your parents have been Christian and have raised you as a Christian, and let's assume your face is white, then I guess you were very lucky to be born into the right face and not needing to ever question your belief, while others are unlucky and are born into the wrong face, into the wrong church, and would have to actively question it to find the truth. So lucky you. To me, that would be a reason to pause and to really reflect, why do I think that my belief is the truth and that another's belief is wrong? And again, it's not enough to have arguments. Maybe you can argue that your belief makes the most sense, or that there were miracles in the past that prove the truth of your belief. But the follower of another belief will probably say the same. He will also say that his belief makes the most sense, and that miracles happened and proved the truth of his belief. And this, of course, does not just go for believers, this also goes for the unbelievers. Especially in the internet, there are so many edgy atheists who arrogantly will say that every religious person, every person who believes in God is an idiot. And again, what I ask these people is, really? Billions upon billions of people are all just dumb. And they are all dumber than you. You are one of the smartest people who ever lived. And you are saying that even some of the greatest thinkers, like for example Kant, or like Thomas Aquinas, or like Leibniz, or like Newton, they were all just idiots. The great thinkers and scientists who revolutionized our thinking and our understanding of the world, they were all just idiots, and you are smarter than all of them. That's what you're saying. And forgive me for thinking that this is a little arrogant. And I'm not trying to make an argument of authority here. I'm not saying, a smart person like Newton believed in God, Newton was smarter than you, so who are you to question the belief in God? I'm not saying that. But I am saying it should at least give you pause. It should raise the question, well, what is there that makes this belief in God seem true to so many people, including so many indeed very smart people? And if you can't explain that, if you can't explain how they could have been wrong, then it doesn't matter how good your arguments are for why you are right, you should still not be so sure of yourself. So this should show why the critical method is so important and so valuable. To Kant, it has two important benefits or two important merits. And even worse, of course, is when in the ideological battles, people are not just claiming that the other side is stupid, but they are claiming that the other side is evil. Again, it is very easy to just dismiss a position because apparently it's evil, but it's a little too easy. So, for example, in the last month, since the massacre of Hamas on the 7th of October, I have, especially here where I live in Germany, because here there's, because of the history, of course, there's a special sensitivity to anti-Semitism. I have seen and heard anyone who at all showed sympathy for the Palestinians dying in Gaza and who criticized at all the actions of the Israeli military. I have witnessed anyone expressing any such opinion be accused of being an anti-Semite. And what you are doing when you are saying that is you are essentially saying that this person is, when they are saying the Palestinians are suffering, the suffering in Gaza must end, you are claiming that they are arguing in bad faith. When you call them an anti-Semite, so when you call them a racist, essentially, you are saying that they don't care for the people in Gaza, that they don't care for the suffering of Palestinians, that actually they are just hating Jews, and they are just happy to have found an argument by which to attack Jews. And I'm not saying that such people don't exist. I know that they exist. But everyone? I mean, it is a fact that there is unspeakable suffering in Gaza. It is a fact that thousands of people, including children, have died there. Might it not be that some people have actual valid concerns or empathy for these people? And to be clear, I'm not saying that you can't still criticize that position. Maybe those people showing solidarity with the Palestinians, maybe their perspective is too one-sided. Maybe they should also consider the Israeli suffering more. All fine and good. But to just say that they are anti-Semites, and I mean, there are a lot of people holding that position. There are whole nations holding that position, standing in solidarity with the Palestinians. And I'm not just talking about fellow Arab nations, I'm talking about nations like Ireland. Do we really want to think that more or less all of Ireland is made up of anti-Semites? That's a little too easy. But it seems that especially in such matters, so in matters of, let's say, political correctness, people are very quick to just condemn anyone who is not completely in line. We can say that we can see that in other questions too, like for example in the debate on transsexuality. Anyone who has any concerns, be it about women's sports or about puberty blockers for teenagers who come out as transsexual, is just dismissed and smeared as a bigot, as a transphobe. I'm not saying such people don't exist. I'm not saying there are no people who just hate and who just come up with arguments to justify their hate. But I'm saying it's a little too easy to just dismiss anyone like that. We should assume that the other side, even if the other side is wrong, I'm not saying we can't still very firmly disagree with them, but we should assume that even if they are wrong, maybe they are not complete idiots, or maybe they are not completely evil. Maybe from their perspective, they are right. Maybe from their perspective, what they are saying seems to be true. So what I need to do is get into their perspective, understand their perspective, and explain how from their perspective their position makes sense. And also maybe look at where their perspective is limited and therefore leads them to wrong conclusions. But only if I do that, only then can I be sure that indeed I'm right and they are wrong, and not the other way around. So that is why the critical method is so important. To Kant, it has two merits. One is that through finding the source of someone's opinion, finding why his position seems to be true to him, and finding the source of an illusion that he might be under, that is the best way to convince someone and to truly convince him. If I just give arguments why the other person is wrong, maybe the arguments will not be listened to, maybe they will be dismissed, or maybe even the other person will listen to the arguments and will change his opinion for a time, but then maybe he may go back to his old opinion because I have not lifted the actual illusion he was under. I have just given him reasons why that illusion is wrong, but the illusion itself still stays there. So let me give an example for that. Let's say there's a magician doing magic tricks, and let's say some person believes that this is actual magic and this is an actual sorcerer. Now, I could give arguments how there is no magic, how magic is not possible according to the laws of nature, and maybe for a time the other person would agree with me, would be like, yeah, you are right, I must not believe in magic, magic doesn't exist. But then maybe the magician does a new trick, and that trick maybe seems even more impressive and amazing, and then maybe the person I talk to will be like, okay, whatever arguments you have given me, I heard them, I can't not refute them, but I know what I saw, and what I saw was actual magic. You can say what you want about the laws of nature, you can say that it doesn't make sense, maybe I even agree with you, I don't know how it makes sense, but I know what I saw, and I saw magic. But if you employed the critical method, you would explain what that person saw to him. You would say, yes, you indeed saw something that seemed to be magic, and I can show you how that illusion came to be. Maybe you can explain how that magician is doing his tricks. Maybe you can even do the trick yourself and show the person that anyone can do it, that it's not some special higher magic power. Maybe you can teach him the trick so that he himself can do it and can see how easy it is to create that illusion. And once you have done that, he probably won't even need further arguments how magic can't exist, how it contradicts the laws of nature, because now he will clearly see how something could seem to be magic to him despite not being magic. And now he probably won't believe in magic even if he sees that magician do further tricks. So this is and I have found this many times, this is the best way to convince someone. Not by just giving arguments why his position is wrong and yours is right, but by explaining to him how he came to his position. By, so to say, understanding his position and his perspective better than he does, and thereby lifting his illusion. Well, and the other merit of the critical method, of course, is what I basically already explained. It is that you can't be fully sure to be right unless you understand how others, not just you can explain that they are wrong, but you can explain how they can believe in something if it is indeed wrong. As long as you can't do that, you should never rest. You should never be sure of yourself. And that is indeed what I practice. When I'm confronted with disagreement, when I'm confronted with another opinion, even if it seems ridiculous, even if it seems quite out there, even if it is some conspiracy theorist, even if it is a fringe opinion, I mean, it could still be right. A fringe opinion can be right. At some point we thought that everyone knew, every scholar absolutely knew that the sun revolves around the earth. And it was quite a fringe theory when Copernicus came along and said, no, the Earth is in fact revolving around the sun. So even something that is fringe, I can't bring myself to just dismiss it unless I can explain to myself how it can be that someone else might believe in that. So, for example, when it comes to people denying the climate crisis, that usually has practical reasons, that usually has moral reasons. For one, they probably don't want to accept the truth because the truth is quite terrible. I mean, there's such a thing as climate depression. There are many people actually falling into despair once they realize how bad the conditions are. So it might be a sort of defense mechanism because you unconsciously sense that you would despair if you accepted the truth, to just outright deny the truth. But what I think is even more important is that if you accepted that there's a climate crisis caused by us, you could not in good conscience go on with your life without changing it. You would then say, okay, maybe I should drive with my car less, maybe I should stop flying, maybe I should stop eating meat. But these people don't want that. They don't want to change their lives. They don't want to take responsibility, but they also don't want to feel guilty about, well, destroying the living conditions on Earth and destroying our very civilization. And therefore, they tell themselves that there is no climate crisis. And this explanation of mine, I think, is very much supported when we consider who are these people who usually deny the climate crisis. Well, they are usually some right-wingers, some Nazis, and let's look at the other opinions. They are usually the same people who are against refugees. They are usually the same people who denied there being a pandemic. And at the surface, you might think, what does one have to do with the other? Why is it that so often racists and climate change deniers are the same people when it doesn't seem to be connected? But if you consider that the connection is they are irresponsible and egoistical people, they are selfish, they only think of themselves, and they are essentially saying, I don't want to take responsibility for others. I don't want to be part of a society. I want to only care for myself. So when they are told there are others fleeing from war or from poverty and needing help, they say, no, I don't want them here. When they are told there's a pandemic and you might have to need a mask, and you might have to wear a mask so that you don't spread the pandemic and so that people with weak immune systems don't get infected and don't die, they say, no, I don't want to take responsibility for the weak. And when they are told that our way of living is destroying the earth, they are saying, I don't want to change my way of living. I don't want to take responsibility for the earth. So since I can explain not just a single opinion of theirs, but basically their whole worldview, that makes me be sure of myself. That gives me conviction that indeed they are wrong and I am right. But if I ever am confronted with an opinion that I can't explain, so I can't explain how that opinion might seem true to someone, then I don't dare to just dismiss it. Even if I have seemingly good arguments, seemingly proving that it is wrong, I would still be careful with that as long as I can't explain how another person might believe in it. And that is why Kant says that it is a much greater achievement and deserves much greater praise to lift an illusion than to just prove a position or disprove another position. And that is indeed what Kant does in his critiques. Kant didn't just do what previous philosophers did. He didn't just say, okay, here are these other systems, these other schools of thought, and they are wrong for this and that reason, and here's my theory, and it is right for this and that reason. Then he wouldn't be that important in the history of philosophy. Then the next guy could have come along and could have said, well, and Kant's theory is also wrong for these reasons, and here's my new theory that is right for these reasons. But rather what Kant did is he looked at the various theories throughout the history of philosophy, and he asked himself, how is it that people and that smart people, that great thinkers, came to believe in these theories? What is it in each of these theories that makes it seem true from a certain perspective? From which perspective did these past thinkers look at things that made them come to these conclusions that they had? And I might add that this is also what I am almost exclusively interested in, being an aufklärer. I may have engaged in regular debates when I was very young, when I was a teenager, but I have long lost my taste for that. And so even when I could argue with certain positions, like with conspiracy theorists or with right-wingers or whatever, of course I could give arguments why they are wrong. But for the most part, they probably wouldn't listen. For the most part, I would probably speak to people who already agree with me. And also, for the most part, I don't think that I could add all that much. There are already people out there doing that. For example, on YouTube, there are channels that do debunking videos, that debunk conspiracy theories. And there are some that are quite good and that are doing good work. And I honestly don't think that I could do better work. So I don't think this is something that I have anything to add to. But when I speak about, for example, climate change deniers, I'm not actually interested in the actual discussion on climate change, and I'm not actually interested in debunking them and in giving arguments for why climate change is indeed real. Because again, others have given those arguments. I mean, there are actual climate scientists talking about this better than I could. What I'm interested in is this sort of meta question: how, if the climate change deniers are wrong, how is it that they stick to a wrong opinion and that they believe in something wrong? And unfortunately, since this is a question that is so rarely asked, since we are not used to this critical method and to this line of thinking, I have often found that people simply don't understand what I'm doing. That people respond to me as if I was a regular opinion holder, so to say, as if I was just giving a certain view, a certain opinion, and trying to argue in favor of that. And then they probably argued against me. But that's actually not what I am trying to do as an aufklärer. What I am trying to do is make people go away from the surface and make people look deeper. I want to teach people and I want to encourage people to be critical and to be self-critical most of all, and to ask, which perspective do I assume in life? How is what to me seems absolutely true and obvious, how is it true and obvious from my perspective? What perspective have I chosen that makes it seem true? Because in the end, it is all about freedom to me. And in the end, Aufklärung is, and this self-criticism of Aufklärung is, about realizing your own freedom, realizing your own actions, realizing that you are not a victim, you are a perpetrator. You choose to do something. You choose to look at the world in a certain way, and that will result in you seeing the world in a certain way. And that is why the critical method is so valuable and why we can learn so much from Kant in this. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Kubilai Celik, Thomas Deuringer, Garnau Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Samit Özkilic, Christos Pai, Alexander Reuter, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.